this is going to be a final philosophy lecture of today. I mean, I don't even know if this is more so a philosophy lecture, just a little tidbit. But the topic is on the transworld identity of schizophrenia or psychotic illnesses, psychiatrist, and the relation to theological questions. Now, if God pre-exists or if God didn't exist. So, first of all, we have to ground our terms, as you mentioned, and as you probably intuit. Schizophrenia. Now, how philosophers perceive schizophrenia is fundamentally different than, psychiatrists. Philosophers, for one, fit regularly debate the onticity, the ontotheology, the ontological substance beyond not just reality in a monistic sense, but in a possible world or even impossible world sense and reference. And I think that ultimately it goes back to the preeminent question of when does it mean when somebody's truly outside reality? Now, one argument, and I don't know if this argument so much, but one argument I might make is that anything that's objectively morally dollaristic or pain causing is not based in hedonistic reality. So basically something that is not organic to the system of equilibrium in an autopoetic or even a neuropoetic or ecopoetic sense and reference. Now, if we simply just want to do the psychiatrist definitionality, and we just say that, schizophrenia is basically a psychotic break from empiricized, ordinary, realist, semantically communalist reality, then most people are kind of in a wage labor relationship. They're obligated to be subscribed to within the transactional analysis of society. So I think that now, when somebody breaks the laws of reality for their psychological or phenomenological perception, becomes, well, why has it become a medicalized problem in the first place? That's one of the Thomas Saw's, R.D. Lane, all these numerous anti-psychiatrists, they really grilled psychiatry. And by simply saying, well, what is the empirical basis? The quantum physicalism, quantum mere topological evidence, beyond a mere behavior constellate of kind of psychiatric packaged systems of thought, right, that constitute each mental disorder in the DSM, for example. So I think that now if we simply use we don't use, the meta-ethical argument that schizophrenia is a gross or profound break-in of what we can all communalistically in a non-solipsistic modification agrees what we should take for granted and what we perceive. Then I understand now, with perception being profoundly altered in an inverted quality sense and across possible worlds, it's a profound can of worms. It's a very mind-boggling, riveted can of worms that not a lot of philosophers, I think, delve into. But I think that now this is it's a fascinating caveat here, is that impossible worlds rather than impossible worlds. Impossible worlds rather than possible worlds. It kind of begs the question of, what is an objective break from reality in an impossible world when it's presumed that reality doesn't exist to begin with, right? Reality are reality and truth really twins, or are they just quasi genetic cousins, second or third cousins? So yeah, I think that truth and reality, morality, these are semantics, for example, language. These are all topics that many people use, but they can't seem to boil down an objective universal, which kind of reflects the restraints and limitations of human consequentialism and symbolism, as media theorist Marshall McLuhan might, reverberate. So I think that now, back to the question of schizophrenic breaks from reality and transworld identity, or the parts, the phenomenological part, the whole relationship between, these essences of schizophrenic ontology, I suppose, in the philosophy of the mind, in a self-homuncularized sense, or Cartesian theater sense, is the amphitheater of the mind, or the Cartesian theater actively strikes the voltage or carburetor known as the homunculi. So I think that now it's a fair question. It's an imperishable question. It's a question that often asks, well, is solipsism evidence that schizophrenia is perhaps more universal in our perceptions than we evidently think it is. It's like psychiatrists often like to draw a line. These are the schizophrenics, and these are not. But are we all potentially acquirable in some exotic geometrical mind geometry sense of experiencing profound, altered, cradleistic or actively perpetually fluid reality states? Do we just have to be in the right quantum swampland environment, or the right, I suppose, praxeologically justifiable and possible world? Now, even in a strictly real hyperrealist, in a Baudrillard sense, the philosopher French continental thinker, or just in a purist realist, pragmatic William James ordinary sense. I think that reality testing and reality itself are two different questions. It's reality is a monolithic, megalithic entity with composed into subparts. In terms of mathematical part-to-whole relations, is a bit of a mathematical indeterminate concept. If you take Gödel's incompleteness theorem or Tarski's undefinability theorem, and you map to literally all possible semantical and mathematical and philosophical axioms that have ever existed, what does that reveal? The truth in itself is inherently pan-Kantian or pan-noumenal at the very apocryphal extreme. So I think that finally, I'm not really good. I'm not so much given a direct argument in this lecture, but I'm more kind of saying in that, the limits of perception in this world might be totally different in an ever possible world. And I mean, that's a very common sense realist notion that many people take for granted. So it's like, what is schizophrenia in this world, and how's it different? Is it the same? I suppose, can semantic sameness for one thin and hood exist? Or does it not exist? Or is schizophrenia fundamentally different in ever possible worlds? And that is a deep, profound question that I argue that quantum psychiatrists of the mind, and also philosophers of mind in general, should be pursuing, is like the parallel world universe versions of what it means to empiricize or medicalize mental categories, which are considered abhorrent according to their metaethical or dollaristic clashing with often collectivist or communalist Chomsky-esque values of society and classical, whether conservatism or liberalism. It all kind of revolves around the axis of collective reality versus the hypersubjectivity of one's extremity of perception. So I think that the closest argument, I would simply state the transworld identity of schizophrenia could be relativistic, it could be monistic, but the one question that I am certain of is that the part holes to what constitutes schizophrenia, whoever truly is a medicalized entity or simply a shamanistic or profoundly altered state of integer, non-mathematically median reality is an ever. And I think the psychiatry needs to look beyond the stereotypization model, the medicalization model, just as philosophers need to look back, but beyond systemic entrenchment, only given certain voices or certain demographics predominant kind of leeway in the philosophical progress of the Lebensworld, entire Lebensworld. So anyways, I just want to twist this slightly back, sidereal it to one more topic, and that's, how can one know the status via quantum computing of, these schizophrenic entities, whether they're subquantum, whether they're purely physicalistic, if that's even possible, like, looking at the brain actively schizophrenic versus not, like make a precise mathematical ratio between, the integers or eigenvalues quantum mechanically that compose the neural dockets of the schizophrenic versus, say, a purely autistic, purely histrionic, purely developmentally disabled brain, for example. So it's really a can of worms, and it often goes back to the classic monad versus dyad, coupled with like ontological question in the Quinean or Anscobian logical positivist Russellian sense. It really meant, mental categories that are simply dollaristic or extremely pain-causing, whether subjectively or objectively, really deserve to be medicalized. I mean, we often associate medicalization with pain, whether physical or mental, but in the strictly mental panpsychic universe, how can a mind really be diseased in a purely anatomical sense if physicalism and mentalism are really kind of the perennial structures, the pillars, the turrets of Cartesian mind-body dualism, which can be easily explained away. So thank you so much, and something to think about.